And I'm now going to have the honor of introducing our guest speaker for today. And our guest speaker for today is Masha Vernik. Masha is, as I mentioned, a student in our class. So she is actually a student at the University of Washington. She has just begun her PhD, which is going to continue on some of the same themes as her master's work, which she'll be presenting today. Her master's was in CEFS, and she worked with organic farmers throughout Washington State. So we're going to get to hear about what she learned from them as she was discussing climate change and the potential of seeds to actually act as a form of adaptation as we deal with climate extremes in our region. In addition to being an excellent integrative thinker in this world of farming and climate adaptation, Masha is herself a farm worker and a gardener and involved in many cool projects, including the Jewish Seed Project, and so is very interested in looking at seeds beyond biological entities and looking at them also as keepers of cultural stories. So I hope I captured that correctly. And it's really wonderful to have Masha up on this side of the classroom today because she's also been in your seat all quarter and also holds the various seminar speakers that we've had in our classroom already. And I think we'll be able to make some connections even to last week's speakers and the ones that are coming next week. So please join me in welcoming both your classmate and our guest speaker for today. Masha, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me in the back? Cool, great. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, as Dr. Sipo said, I am here today to talk about the role of seeds in climate adaptation, right? So we are in this era of climate change, right? The weather is becoming more unpredictable. Droughts are happening more frequently, as well as other extreme weather events like extreme heat, and flooding. And as we know, and as you can guess because we're in the seeds class, seeds can be a really valuable tool that a farmer has in their toolbox in terms of adapting to these changing conditions. And I know that we already talked about this a little bit through our previous speakers, so I'd love to just hear some popcorn, like initial thoughts of how might seeds play a role in climate adaptation on farms? You could think, oh yeah, yes. Yes, drought-resistant varieties, perfect. Anything else? Yes, adapted to the region. Anything else? Yeah.
On the other hand, if there's flooding, having crops can help with runoff.
Oh yeah, having crops can help with water runoff. So you're talking about like preventing soil erosion? Yeah, like having really crops that can build healthy soil can help prevent soil erosion during flooding. Anything else? Great. Those were all really good examples of how seeds can be used for climate adaptation. But today I'll be talking a little bit less about individual seeds and their varieties and more about why having diversity of seeds overall is good. So we're moving beyond the level of the individual seed and we're looking at the crop assemblage overall. And so we talk a lot about resilience and climate resilience, so I thought it would actually be helpful to ground us and define resilience, right? So I'm using a socio-ecological definition of resilience, and there's a whole field of study that looks at resilience and defines it and tries to understand what it means. But I'm using this definition that sees the world as like a combination of nature and society. And in this sense, resilience means being able to absorb disturbance while maintaining the same structure and function. So that means if a heat wave hits a farm, afterwards they can kind of continue operating as a farm even if they maybe changed what they were growing or how they were growing it, but they're still, fundamentally still a farm. The ability to self-organize. So after, again, in the face of disturbance, maybe farmers can help each other out, share information, things like that. And the ability to increase capacities for learning and adaptation. So this is really critical, that you're always learning from experience and implementing those learnings in the future. On the left-hand side, there's, I guess it's for you on the right-hand side. There's that kind of diagram showing these different principles of socio-ecological resilience. And if you look over here, one of them is about maintaining diversity and redundancy. So when we look at, and so there's all this theory, again, of why diversity is important for resilience. And this, when we talk about diversity, here I'm talking about crops, but in the socio-ecological sense, like diversity can also refer to like diversity of forms of knowledge, diverse like livelihood pathways, like diversity in terms of like where people are coming from and their experience. So this theory is like pretty encompassing, but of course I'm talking today about seeds and So one of the principles is response diversity, which is this idea that you want different components of a system to have different responses to stress. So in this case, right, if you have zucchini, which likes heat, and spinach, which doesn't like heat, you plant both of them, one will do well in the heat and one would do well in the cold. So by having both of them, you kind of hedge your bets. Similarly, you have this idea of functional diversity, which is that different parts of a system have different roles to play. And so if you have redundancy in those components, then if one of them fails, then something else will play that same role. So if you're thinking on a farm, we're talking about like, cover crops or nitrogen fixers. Maybe that's like one role to play. So you want to have multiple nitrogen fixers so that if one of them, like something happens to one of them, then you have something else that will like play that same role. And so that's the theory, right? That's a theory behind diversity and resilience. And so my interest was, okay, how does this actually play out on the farm, right? Like, how can we take this theory and see if it's actually working like on people's farms? So I had two research questions. One of them was about how does crop diversity contribute to climate resilience from farmers' perspectives? And then the second is, conversely, how does climate change influence crop strategy? Because it's important, even though we're talking about seeds and resilience, if a farmer's actually thinking about what they want to plant that season, maybe they're thinking about resilience, but maybe they have a bunch of other things to think about too. Maybe they're thinking about climate change, but they also have to satisfy their markets. And so in order to understand the like adaptation strategies, you have to understand where people are coming from overall, like the general context that they live in. That's a general. I don't know if you guys know about like climate reductionism. Is that a term you're familiar with? Which is basically the idea that a lot of times when we're studying climate adaptation and climate change, sometimes we have the tendency to think that all actions are motivated by the thing that we're studying, right? But the real world is a lot more complicated than that. When farmers are picking crops, they're not just thinking about climate change. So in order to understand how climate change is affecting the world, you kind of have to understand the world more broadly first. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay. So I did 28 interviews with production vegetable farmers in Western Washington. They were all people who were involved in crop planning. That often meant farm owners or farm managers. And they were all people using organic practices. I wanted to interview organic farmers because that's where probably we're seeing more diversity. And therefore, people are like maybe thinking about this and can actually speak to the role of diversity and resilience. This is the kind of geographic distribution of where I interviewed people, and they were all, across these different sizes and like demographic characteristics, and half of them were certified organic farmers and half of them were non-certified organic farmers as well. So that's also an important distinction. So, okay, answering this first question, how does crop diversity contribute to resilience from farmers' perspectives? So this is one of the quotes I got. The kind of farming I've chosen to do is resilient against that unpredictability. It's diversified, so if one crop gets knocked out, others do fine. So more or less, this is like word for word the idea of response diversity, right? This idea that if something fails, something else will still be there. So it was cool to see, this like academic theory actually is kind of being repeated on the ground level by farmers. But I found that there was like a little bit more to it than that, right? So here's another quote. So if you're berries and you get smoke in the summer and it impacts your crop, you only have 1 month. Whereas we spread our harvest, sorry. Whereas we spread our harvesting over 12 months, and so it's a different risk factor. So what I found here is that this idea of response diversity, or different reactions to environmental change, is not just happening at the level of crops. There's also a time dimension of it. So people are trying to hedge their bets not just by planting different crops, but also by planting at different times of the year. So that's the idea that there's different crops and also different times that people are planting things. So this is just like showing how it actually plays out on the ground for farmers. But yeah, there's also more to it than that. And this is a farmer who has this strategy of basically overplanting seedlings. So they plant a bunch of seedlings at the beginning of the season in greenhouses, knowing that they'll only plant some of them in the springtime when it's time to put stuff in the ground. So we waste some potting soil, we waste some seeds, and we waste some time in the seed room, but we don't put things out in the field if the weather is showing that it's not going to be great. So here we're basically seeing that having a bunch of crops, like planting a bunch of seeds early on, gives you the flexibility to pick what you want to plant later into the season. So there's like these dimensions of flexibility in it, which when we're talking about shifting your behaviors based on environmental changes, flexibility is really important, right? Like we don't know, farmers these days, they don't know if it's gonna be a rainy spring or a dry spring. And so being able to pivot based on the information that you're getting is really, really critical. And so we're seeing that actually having diverse crops allows people to do that. And then this is also happening kind of over time. It's not just happening at the scale of a single season, it's happening year to year to year. And so this farmer is talking about how, trying different things and seeing, and it took a few years, especially with hot peppers, trying different things and seeing what sells the best and what performs the best. And so sometimes I just try new things. And then there's also tried and trues that we grow every year. So she's taking this approach of like being very experimental with a few crops, and planting a bunch of different things and kind of just seeing what works, while also maintaining things that are like pretty consistent performers year to year. So basically we're seeing that crop diversity allows for these, I would call them practices of resilience, of flexibility and experimentation. You need flexibility because you need to, again, be flexible in your decision making as things change. But then also experimentation is really, really important to that, because crop diversity allows for this kind of trial and error. So basically this is all an example, or this is showing how like when you look at a landscape, like a farm landscape, you're not just looking at crops, you're looking at like a process of repeated decision making and experimentation that farmers are making based on their social contexts just as much as their ecological ones. Cool. Okay. So moving on to the second section, which is how does climate change influence crop strategy? So again, it's really important to be able to understand the context that people are making these decisions in. And so these are all kind of I would say like the main factors that motivate why you plant what you plant. And so that's how you sell, when you sell, who you sell to, and the preferences of the farmer themselves, like what do they want to grow. And that becomes really key with things like if you have like cultural preferences, if you're really love diversity, or if you kind of like things to be more simplified. And each of them can be a little bit more specialized or more diversified. So for example, how you sell, if you're selling more to wholesale, then that actually incentivizes you to simplify your production practice. Not simplify, I'd rather say specialize your production practice, because you want to be able to like sell a bunch of kale, for example, and you're somebody's kale supplier, so you need to sell them like a lot of kale. Whereas if you're selling to the farmer's market, then you need to sell a bunch of different things. You need to sell like the grocery basket of goods that people might get at the grocery store. So, and then this is all these decisions are made within the context of somebody's like limitations of what is even possible to grow on the land and in the climate that they have. So this all culminates in this, I would say, like a strategy called specialized diversification, because farmers find their market niche. I think a lot of times we forget this if we're not like I don't know, somehow involved in agricultural production, but farms are businesses, right? They're not just growing whatever crops they want that are just available to them or they want to grow. They also have to be viable businesses and find a market that they want to grow that they want to grow for, and who wants to buy their produce. So that could mean specializing in culturally relevant crops. So there were some farmers who were trying to grow sorghum, which is a tropical crop that's kind of hard to grow here, but they were trying to adapt it to the new climate. Some farmers were, growing tatsoi. Another farmer was growing papalo for like the Mexican folks in the Seattle area. Being able to grow those crops for that group lets you kind of fulfill that market niche. Other specializations were growing early or late season crops or growing specialty crops for restaurants. Like one of them was radicchio. Here, I have a radicchio here. This was one of the farms that I worked on. This is like a little radicchio thing on my water bottle. It's cute. It's like a lettuce, but it's not really a lettuce. It's a bit, I don't actually know what plant family it is. Does anyone know what plant family radicchio is in? Okay, anyway. That was just like an aside. And then the idea is that people are specializing in their things, but they're not sacrificing diversity. So all these farms, even though they specialize in this stuff, there's still a bunch of diversity around them. So you might be growing like 30 crops, but like one of those crops is radicchio and you're growing a lot of radicchio or something like that. So it's this idea that, okay, like specializing and diversifying aren't always at odds with each other, which I think sometimes it's kind of presented that way. So, okay, now that we know how in general farmers are making decisions about their crops, then we can think about how does climate change influence their decision making. Earlier I was talking about the effect of diversity on resilience. And so, yeah, climate change is actually giving people another reason to maintain diversity. They need to have that diverse assemblage of crops to be able to withstand environmental change. But at the same time, it's causing specialization in other crops. For example, crops that are like newer to the region. The numbering's messed up here. But like these new to the region crops like melons, sweet potatoes, grapes, onions, things like that. As well as plants that some farmers are trying to focus on plants that are really good at handling variable conditions. So this farmer is talking about, this quote here is talking about somebody who's shifting mostly to greens because they don't care whether it rained or not this summer. While climate change is giving another incentive for diversity, at the same time it's causing some more specialization in other crops. So it's this like dual effect, more or less. Yeah, I also found that we're talking all about like why diversity is important in what you're growing and the seeds that you're planting. But at the same time, we have to think, okay, why are the farmers here able to make those choices? And a lot of the farmers who I interviewed were growing for CSAs or for farmers markets or for restaurants. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of people who have money to pay for that kind of food here. This is a pretty wealthy urban area, and there's like urban areas all throughout Western Washington where people can afford to pay for that. And yeah, even though some farmers were also selling to food banks and were selling to, I would say some of them were selling to food banks. At the same time, I would say they did rely on like a higher, customers who did have more money in order to pay for their produce, which is that's like a whole other conversation. And I think a lot of the farmers actually felt really conflicted about it because they were like, yeah, like we want our food to actually be able to feed people who need the food, not just people who have money. But at the same time, they were like, we also want to be well compensated for our work, and we want to be able to pay our employees well. And so they felt like a lot of people felt kind of like conflicted about, how to price things and what that means and, why are we even doing this in the first place? But that's a whole other conversation. I'm not going to try to resolve that in this presentation, but just like as a side note. Basically, yeah, having organic markets was an important condition that allowed for diversification. And then also having seed sourcing options, like where to source your seeds from. Like people were buying organic seed from something like Johnny's, and they were also buying seeds from like smaller regional seed companies, so having those sources was really important. And so that's going back to our earlier, like 2 weeks ago when the woman came from the WSU Bread Lab. Marie Metcalf Manning, she was talking about the breeding. So in that sense, the breeding work that they're doing is like an important condition to allow for this kind of diversification. So just to kind of connect the dots there. Also, I want to say, I'm not trying to say that, okay, you just need crop diversity and then everything's good. Like, there's lots of other things that you need in order to adapt to climate change. Farmers were also talking a lot about installing greenhouses and, shifting their irrigation systems, but there were constraints on their abilities to do that, namely capital and land access, like having financial capital and having land. And of course, that was especially limited for farmers of color, immigrant farmers, and farmers without generational wealth. And I would also say first-time farmers, people who weren't like inheriting a farm business. And so that just shows that, the ability to adapt to climate change is very intersected with the broader structural inequities we have in our society. But I will say that seeds are cool because I heard about using seeds from almost every farmer I talked to. So it wasn't really something that felt as limited or constrained as, for example, building a new greenhouse. You have to buy seeds anyway, so you're not really spending extra money in order to buy different seeds. It's like a pretty accessible adaptation option, which is pretty cool. So these are my conclusions, basically, that farmers are agreeing that crop diversity helps build resilience. But resilience might not be their only motivation for why they're diversifying. They had these specialized diversification strategies to fulfill their market niches, but also, while they were specializing, they were also maintaining diversity. And then conversely, climate change is both like giving another reason to maintain diversity as well as some avenues to specialize. And it's important to remember that crop diversity is not the only role, the only way to adapt, but it does play an important role. So that's it for my research. I do have a part 2, so before you applaud for me. I guess, should I do questions now or for this, or should I keep, or should I? Okay, I have this other section. It's really short. This is like 2 slides, don't worry. Okay, I'm just going to go on to this, and then we'll do questions for everything at the end. Okay, cool. So you might be wondering, why does this woman care so much about seeds? Like, why? And for me, it really began in 2018. I did a study abroad program in Ecuador. It was a tropical ecology program, and the summer after that, I had the privilege to stay with a Quechua community for 2 months, doing research and also just kind of living with them. I learned way more from them than the other way around. What you're seeing here is a chakra, which is a traditional subsistence farm system. It's a like swidden farm where people are growing traditional crops, but they also grow cacao often as a crop to sell. And as you can see, it kind of just looks like the rainforest, but it's actually a farm. Like, the amount of biodiversity that you can have that people are growing in very small plots is astounding. They could grow like 100 different crops, some for food, some for medicine, some for fuel, for ceremonial purposes. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And each of these crops that is being grown has this long-standing connection to the past, right? Each seed it contains the information of how it contains information of like the genetic information from many, many generations of environmental selection and human selection, right? It's being selected and changed by the environment, by the water availability, by the sun availability, and also by what people are selecting for, what they want and what they want to grow. And it's being passed down also with knowledge of how to care for it, how to grow it, how to use it, how to make medicines, how to make food, how to build things from it. And I was really amazed by like the beauty of seeds and how much they intersect with culture, knowledge, memory, and story. And that kind of led me to turn inwards and ask, okay, well, what are my seeds? Like, where do I come from? And I think a lot of us have seeds in our past. Even if we weren't like handed seeds down from our parents or grandparents, if we look back, I think a lot of us have in some way, like somewhere in our ancestry, some connection to land and agriculture and seed. And so I think it's a question that we can ask ourselves. And for me, asking this question led me down kind of a long path. And it led me to this crop called kishuim. So I started the Jewish Seed Project. So I'm Jewish. And I started the Jewish Seed Project in 2021 with a collective of growers, storytellers, researchers. And we were all kind of asking this question, what is a Jewish seed? What is Jewish seed keeping? For us, it's kind of a complicated question because we're a diasporic group. So we live in many different parts of the world. So it's hard to be like, oh, there's one seed that unites us all from like Europe and North Africa and Spain and Portugal and South America and the Middle East. It's a broad spanning diasporic group. So it led us. So it was like a ripe question. We were like, okay, we really want to like lead with this question, and I think it is like really a question-oriented group. Like we're not trying to find the answer. We're just trying to like keep asking the question. And so the crop we started with was kishuim. So it's a chait melon. It's like in the cantaloupe, similar to cantaloupe or Armenian cucumber. And it is mentioned very, very often in traditional texts, like the Torah, which is the Old Testament, and the Talmud, which is kind of many, many centuries of interpretations of the Torah. And it's like mentioned so many times, like maybe dozens of times, maybe even hundreds. And we were like, okay, it's mentioned so much, like our ancestors were definitely growing it and using it. It like had an important role in society, but why isn't it on our dinner tables? Like literally nobody knows, like at least in Jewish communities, like it's not a common crop the way that like pomegranate or grapes, grapes or wheat is, it doesn't have that like symbolic, it's not imbued with symbolism. And so we were like, okay, well, let's reconnect with it. And so we collected varieties from different places, and we kind of crossed them all together, and we're just exploring and seeing what it looks like. The first few years were like very much exploratory. Now we're kind of trying to select for some traits that we like. And yeah, I think it's also really important to mention that even though I think for us it's like a story of reconnection, although maybe there were some Jewish diasporic communities in like Tunisia or some other places who were able to maintain it, but for a lot of us it was a story of reconnection. Meanwhile, this crop has been grown pretty prolifically throughout the Middle East and Mediterranean for many, many centuries. It's been grown by Italians, Egyptians, Palestinians, Lebanese people, and it is, and known by many different names. Actually, interestingly, the word in Palestinian Arabic, fakusa, is related to the ancient Hebrew word for how to take the hair off of this fruit, fakus. It's like the same word, And I think it just goes to show that for us, when we're thinking about Jewish seeds, it's a lot of like recognizing that we have like shared relationships. We're not trying to be like, oh, this is our seed that we have. It's because of diaspora, a lot of times the seeds that you relate to are also seeds that other people have related to as well, like our neighbors in many parts of the world. So that is just like some of the kind of what our inquiry has led us to and what we've thought about. So yeah, that is, and then I will end with a quote from Stevie Wonder. I think, check out this album if you like plants. It's called Journey Through the Secret Life of Plants. And I'll read this is the opening line of the album. I can't conceive the nucleus of all begins inside a tiny seed, and what we think as insignificant provides the purest air we breathe. Thank you.
Wow, Masha, I'm not sure where we're going to go in the question period, but the floor is open. Thank you for that excellent presentation. And so we'd love to hear your questions on Masha's research, on the Jewish Seed Project, on this Stevie Wonder album that I somehow don't know about, that I'm going to go home and check it out immediately. Yes. Was that a hand? No. Okay.
Has anyone heard of that album or listened to it? Hands? Nice. Seeing a nod? Nice. It's good.
Real quick, I looked up Radicchio family, and it's
Nice.
apparently in the daisy family,
Oh,
Asteraceae.
Asteraceae.
Which is interesting to me.
Cool.
But my question is, if the farmers you were talking with, if any of them were interested in or were saving their own seed, or if that was feasible at all for them?
Yeah, totally. There were a few farmers saving their own seed. I think for a lot of them it was like experimental. Very related to climate change, there were some farmers who were like specifically growing sorghum, and they're trying to adapt sorghum to the Pacific Northwest. And there weren't that many other people who are doing it where they can like buy sorghum from a catalog. So it's for those kinds of like crops that maybe aren't, maybe they're pretty widespread, like sorghum is a major grain that's grown throughout Africa, but maybe in the, Pacific Northwest or North American catalogs, it's harder to find, especially adapted to this region. There was another farmer who was saving leek seed because they like specialize in leeks, and they would just grow a lot, and they want to be able to, in addition to buying leek seed from other places, they want to experiment with their own so that it can similarly adapt. So I think a lot of the people who are doing that were like experimenting with regional adaptation to their specific, not only to the Pacific Northwest climate, but also to their specific farm microclimate. Yeah. Okay, I'll just say something else about that, which is that it's interesting because sometimes you think, oh, Western Washington, they must like experience similar climate impacts, but I actually found that there was a decent amount of variation between farmers who were, like, for example, in a little bit more inland versus those who were closer to the coasts. Because if you're a little more inland, then you're experiencing slightly more extreme temperatures, and so a heat wave might be those just like few degrees hotter and harder to handle than somebody who is experiencing more moderate temperatures near the coast, or for example, up in the Skagit Valley, where their climate is like moderated by the Juan de Fuca Straits. Like it's slightly more mild.
Hi. This is more of a methods question for your research, but I was curious what your process was for like outreach to the farmers and like how you went about getting and conducting all of those interviews.
Yeah, so I started with some sampling from snowball sampling. Do you guys know Eli Wheat? He's a big farm person at UW. He's one of the people, I think along with Dr. Sipos, who started the UW farm. Okay, Dr. Sipos didn't start. Yeah, anyway, yeah. So he was on my committee, and he's a farmer. He's both a teaching professor at UW and a farmer out on Whidbey Island. So he connected me to a few folks. And then I also just went to farmers markets and asked people at farmers markets. I also just looked stuff up and did cold outreach. And then I tried to get on a few lists, I sent out some listservs, some blasts through listservs, and things like that. So it was definitely a mix, and I probably reached out to like 2 or 3 times as many people as actually the number who wanted to be interviewed by me. Some people were really excited to talk to someone, and some people were like, I'm busy, like I don't have time to talk to you, which is fair enough.
Do you think that the results that you found, Masha, are also relevant for non-organic farmers? Well, you mentioned that some were certified and some weren't, but even those who would specifically say, I'm not farming organically, or even I'm farming regeneratively, or I'm a kind of conventional big ag farmer, are there any lessons for them?
Definitely. I think like this, I think this is pretty applicable, right? Every farmer is thinking about how you sell, when you sell, and who you sell to, and maybe they also have their own preferences of what they want to sell. And so I think that this like framework for thinking about how this decision making happens is pretty applicable no matter how you're farming. And then similarly, these ideas of like kind of practices of resilience is also pretty applicable across contexts. So being able to be flexible with your decision making and experimental is always going to be valuable, but at the same time, people want to have like something more, I guess, tried and true to lean on. Yeah.
And sorry, a follow-up question. Do you think that there's also, from your research, would you also make recommendations about not just the crops that farmers are planting? Like, you're obviously looking at the landscape level, right? Like, so not, you went from seeds all the way to kind of planting plans and crop diversity. But even beyond that, it seems like there are recommendations about kind of farm planning also that go beyond crops. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I think so. I think beyond that, it would be more like long-term, are you talking about like riparian buffers and like hedgerows? So there are things that you can do at the landscape level to increase diversity as well by like planting hedgerows. So hedgerows are non-crops that you plant along your rows, and that might bring like pollinators. Cover crops, similarly, are things that you would plant in the off-season to increase the soil health of where you're planting. And yeah, I think that there definitely are lessons. I think, we know a lot that having that kind of more robust ecosystem can generally make it can increase soil health as well as pollinator habitat. I didn't ask as many of those questions because I went really, really specific in the seeds. So I didn't have, I only had an hour to do interviews, so I didn't collect data on that. But I do think that there could be applications there.
Hi. I'm wondering if for farmers that are trying to diversify, like organic farmers that are diversifying their crop variety, is it more taxing on them economically? Like, does that put a financial burden on them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think that it's no up to a certain point. So you need to diversify in order, for example, if you're selling, again, through CSAs or farmers markets, then you need a certain base level of diversity in order to satisfy your customers. Because they don't want to go to you and only buy kale. They want to get their kale and their cucumbers and their carrots and a bunch of different things. But there is a sense of too much diversity. And actually a number of people talked about that to me where they were yeah, the more you diversify, the more processes you need for every crop. Each crop requires its own planting plan and weeding and harvesting and processing. And so having too much can actually be taxing. So you kind of want to have this there's sort of a sweet spot in the middle of you want to have a baseline that will allow for how you're selling and also provide that resilience, but you don't want too much that will kind of make your process too chaotic, and so I think so farmers kind of arrived to that year over year through trial and error. It wasn't oh, this is one thing and I'm sticking to it. Again, it was every single year they amend their crop plan from the previous year and take away crops or add crops, things like that. Good question.
Thank you for this talk. Who do you think these results are useful for? How do you envision it to appear in the real world?
Yeah, thanks so much, Vedika. So I like to be applied in my research. So I actually, next week, I'll be presenting the Organic Seed Alliance. They host quarterly calls. So I'll be presenting some of these results to the Organic Seed Alliance and their network of seed, like seed growers and seed policy advocates and farmers, kind of production farmers as well. So that's one avenue. The other is, I think, and then the other is production farmers. But to be honest, I don't think I would present like this specific thing. I think when you do research, qualitative research, you kind of have to figure out what aspects of the findings are relevant to the audience. And so if I got up there and I was like, okay, this is the definition of resilience, and like these are the principles, and this is the theory, and this is how the data connects to it, then people would be like, cool, like how do I use that information? And so a lot of it is figuring out, okay, what are the kind of key takeaways and the key messages? So for the farmers, I'm going to be submitting like a little write-up of just a list of the climate adaptation strategies I heard, like synthesizing from farmers, and just be like, this is what I heard. Like people are just doing these season extension and diversification in their crops and irrigation plans. And that was data that I collected that just did not even make it into my thesis at all, And so just collecting data for and I kind of knew that I wanted to do that at the beginning before I did the interview. So making sure to add in a few questions for those audiences, even if it wasn't like valuable or if it wouldn't necessarily end up in my thesis, was something that I was thinking about from the beginning.
I was wondering, what are kind of your thoughts, because we've also learned about like breeding for climate resilience in seeds, and I was kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, should our focus be more on promoting biodiversity in farms, or should our focus be like a blend of using these breeded seeds that are breeded for climate resilience, or should we focus mostly on the breeding for climate resilience? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mix. So we need people to do that breeding work, because having those climate adapted varieties are really important. A lot of times they're like newer varieties or crops that are new to the region even, and those are really important for people to be able to take and experiment with. And at the same time, that's probably not making up the bulk of what somebody is planting. And so people need to have like diversity in what they're planting, maybe with more standard crops, as well as those like more experimental crops. But I guess there are some, I'm not talking about like the WSU Bread Lab stuff. I think that's really cool. But I think a lot of times there's a narrative around seed where it's like, oh, we need to like do GMO editing to make drought resistant or salt tolerant seed or something like that. And yeah, sure, I think that could maybe be part of the solution, but oftentimes it's sold as like, this is the thing that we need to do, and like we just need to give out the seed. And a lot of times that could end up like displacing people's traditional seeds that are really well adapted to their local environments, and also displacing, diverse seeds. And so I think where it does, when that like tension exists, I think it's important to be like, okay, but there's a lot of like valuable traditional knowledge, and we need to hold on to that, and these like updated seeds shouldn't necessarily displace it. But at the same time, like generally breeding for climate adaptation, I think is an important thing. That's part of the solution. In general, whenever anybody's like, this is the one solution and this is all we need to do, I'm generally pretty skeptical of it. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's a wonderful place to end. Those were great questions. Let's give one more big round of applause. I so appreciated that ending, because I think it also sets us up for the next few weeks of class, where we're going to hear about different perspectives, including, seed saving from indigenous seed or plant communities, next week and kind of starting seed banks around that. And then we're also going to have a chance to dig into biotechnology the following week with a visit from somebody from the Gates Foundation. And then the following week, looking more into indigenous seed systems as well in northern Canada. So we're going to have a chance to kind of go out of the States as you started to take us, to international waters, and then also being able to pull these different conceptions of seeds and different approaches to breeding, selecting, diversifying, and be able to bring them together in our final talk, our final class together, which is under the frame of yes and. So I'm very much in line with you, Masha. I think it's really hard to ever find a silver bullet or one single answer. And so we're, in a seminar like this, we get to explore lots of different potential solution spaces. So with that, I also want to bring your attention to the final assignment that is going to be coming up. So if you haven't taken a look at that, please do. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll talk about it briefly in class. But so you can just start seeing the ways that we're going to ask both the 400 and the 500 students to pull all of these diverse seminars together into a short final synthesis and reflection. Thank you again, Masha. This was really wonderful, and I look forward to your reflections. As always, we'll share a selection of those with our speaker, and hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon. Take good care. See you next week.